He was in his early 40s, living what many would call a comfortable life, but inside, something felt missing. His days blended into one another, with work, responsibilities, and the occasional social gathering. He had friends, but they were more like acquaintances, with conversations that never went deeper than the usual small talk. His family was distant. He had lost touch with them over the years, too caught up in his own world. He thought about them occasionally, but most of the time, those thoughts would pass quickly like forgotten dreams. It wasn't that he didn't care about his family. It was just that life had a way of pushing things aside, especially things you didn't want to face. The grief of losing his mother a few years ago had left a gap in his heart that he didn't know how to fill. He didn't want to admit that it hurt, so he buried it, just like he had buried other feelings over the years. As for his father, they spoke rarely, just the occasional holiday greeting or a quick check-in, but nothing that would give any real sense of closeness. One evening, after a long day at work, he found himself in the attic of his house. The task was simple: clear out some boxes to make space for other things. He wasn't expecting anything life-changing, just a bit of tidying up. But as he moved through the piles of old stuff, something caught his eye. A dusty old photo album. It was an antique-looking album, bound in leather with a faded gold design on the cover. He had seen it many times before, tucked away in the corner of the attic, but he had never thought much of it. That evening, though, something about it drew him in. He set down the box he had been carrying and carefully pulled the album from the shelf. As he opened the cover, the smell of old paper filled the air. The pages were yellowed with age and the photos were starting to fade. Each photo was like a window to a different time, capturing moments he had almost forgotten. There were pictures from his childhood, of family trips, birthday parties, and holidays. The faces of his parents smiled back at him, youthful and happy, just like they were in those days before everything changed. His fingers lingered on each page, remembering things he hadn't thought of in years. He could almost hear his mother's voice, soft and nurturing, calling him in for dinner. He could see his father's proud smile as he handed him his first bicycle. In those moments, he was reminded of how simple life used to be, how full of love it had been. But it didn't take long before a feeling of sadness crept over him. There was one picture in particular that stopped him cold. It was a picture of him as a child, standing between his parents. They were in a park, the sun shining brightly behind them. He could see the joy in their faces, their eyes sparkling with happiness. It was the kind of picture that made you believe that everything in the world was perfect, but as he stared at it, a tightness formed in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt that kind of happiness. The man's life had shifted so much over the years, and he realized for the first time in a long time that he didn't know where that child had gone. The child in the photo was innocent, full of hope, and without a care in the world. Somewhere along the way, that child had grown into someone who had built walls around himself, someone who had become cynical and disconnected. The joy in that picture seemed so distant now. He flipped the pages slowly, trying to find more memories to hold on to, but they all felt like a dream, blurry and distant. There were other photos of family gatherings, his mother's birthday, family barbecues, Christmas mornings, but the faces seemed almost like strangers now. The warmth in those images felt like something he could never fully grasp anymore. As he turned the pages, the photos seemed to take on a life of their own. They weren't just frozen moments in time. They were pieces of a puzzle he had long forgotten to put together. He found himself overwhelmed with a mix of emotions. Part of him was grateful for the memories, but another part of him felt deep regret. He thought about how he had distanced himself from his parents in his adult years, how his relationship with them had become strained, and how he had never fully appreciated the family he had. The realization hit him hard. He had taken them for granted. He had been so wrapped up in his own world that he hadn't seen the signs that they were slipping away. And now, with his mother gone and his father living in a quiet house by himself, it was too late to turn back the clock. He couldn't fix what had been broken. The man closed the album for a moment, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the regrets pressing down on him, suffocating him. What had he done with his life? What had he done with the love and support that his parents had given him? Had he even tried to appreciate them when they were still around? His fingers brushed over the photo of him as a child with his parents. He stared at the image for a long time as if searching for something he had lost. Maybe he was looking for the innocence he had once had, Or maybe he was just longing for a time when life had felt simpler. He wasn't sure. But in that moment, he knew one thing. He had to do something. He couldn't keep living like this, buried in work and distractions, pretending that everything was fine. He needed to reconnect with the parts of himself that he had lost over the years, the parts that had been left behind when he chose to shut everyone out. The photo had stirred something inside him, something that he couldn't ignore any longer. He took a deep breath and stood up, carrying the album with him as he left the attic. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't keep running from his past. Maybe, just maybe, finding the courage to face it would be the first step toward healing. The photo had changed something in him. It had made him realize that there was more to life than just getting through the day. There were people he needed to reconnect with, feelings he needed to confront, and a version of himself that he needed to rediscover. As he walked downstairs, the photo album still in his hands, he felt a sense of resolve. He didn't know what the next step would be, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to take it. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of energy. For the first time in what felt like years, the man was compelled to think about something other than work or his daily routines. That old photograph, especially the image of him as a child standing between his parents, was like a light switch that had been turned on in his mind. It reminded him of a life before everything became complicated. It reminded him of a time when he was full of hope, when his family was together and everything seemed possible. He couldn't stop thinking about how distant he had become from everything he once cared about. His childhood, his parents, his home. Everything felt like distant memories tucked away and forgotten in the back of his mind. Yet staring at that photo, he felt a longing for something more real, more meaningful. He was tired of the emptiness he felt inside. He wanted to feel connected to something again. The following weekend, with the photo album still fresh in his mind, he decided to take a walk around his old neighborhood. It had been years since he last visited, and he wasn't sure what he was hoping to find. Maybe it was just the desire to reconnect with the past or to search for some kind of understanding he couldn't quite grasp. Whatever the reason, he put on his jacket and left the house. The streets were quieter than he remembered. It was a peaceful Saturday morning, the sun shining through the trees and casting soft shadows on the sidewalks. As he walked down the familiar path, he passed houses that seemed unchanged, but something was different. It wasn't just the houses. It was him. He felt like a stranger in a place that once felt like home. He walked past the old playground, where he had spent so many afternoons running around with friends, climbing on the jungle gym, and playing games. The swings creaked in the breeze, and for a moment he imagined himself as a child again, swinging higher and higher with the wind in his hair. But that feeling was fleeting, and soon it was replaced by the realization that those days were gone. He continued walking, heading toward the park where his family used to go on weekends. As he approached the entrance, he could already see the bench where he had sat with his parents during summer picnics, laughing and talking. But now the park was quiet. It was a place he once took for granted, but now it seemed like a memory from another lifetime. Sitting on the bench, he closed his eyes for a moment, trying to soak in the memories of that time. The laughter of his parents, the warmth of the sun, and the smell of fresh grass. It all felt so distant, like something he could never fully reach again. But in the quiet of the park, he realized something. He didn't need to go back to those exact moments. What he needed was to understand them, to remember why they mattered. The man stayed in the park for a while longer, just sitting and reflecting. He thought about his parents, who had always tried to give him the best of everything. They had worked hard to create a life for him, to provide for him and to support him in ways he never truly appreciated. And now with the photo in his hands, he was starting to see things differently. It wasn't that his parents were perfect. Like any family, they had their own struggles. But they had always been there for him, even when he didn't realize how much they were sacrificing. He remembered the late nights when his father worked overtime, the times his mother stayed up with him when he was sick, and how they both always tried to make his world brighter, even when their own was dimming. As the man sat there, lost in thought, an elderly woman walked by, holding the hand of a young child. They were talking and laughing, their voices carrying in the stillness of the park. The man watched them for a moment, feeling a pang of longing. It reminded him of when he was younger, when his parents had been that source of comfort, love, and guidance. He felt an ache in his chest, a deep yearning to recapture that sense of connection. He stood up, dusting off his pants, and began to make his way back home. But something had shifted inside him. He was no longer willing to just let the past stay buried. He needed to understand it, to piece together the story of his life and his family, no matter how difficult it might be. He didn't know exactly how to do it, but he knew he had to try. The next morning, he decided to call his father. It had been months since they last spoke, and even then, their conversation had been brief and impersonal. They had both drifted into their separate worlds, and neither had made the effort to reconnect. But now something had changed. He needed to know more, to ask the questions he had avoided for so long. Picking up the phone, he dialed his father's number. It rang a few times before his father answered, his voice sounding surprised but warm. "Hello," his father said. "Hi, Dad," the man replied, his voice a little shaky. "It's me." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. "Well, it's about time you called." The man smiled despite himself. "Yeah, I guess it is. I've been thinking a lot lately." "What about?" his father asked. The man took a deep breath, trying to put his thoughts into words. "I've been thinking about us, about the way things used to be. I don't know, I just feel like I've missed so much." His father's tone softened. "You've been busy, son. Life gets in the way sometimes. We all have our own things to deal with." "I know," the man said, feeling a lump in his throat. "But I've been looking at old photos and I realized I don't even remember some of the best parts of our life together. And I don't want to keep living like this, distant and disconnected. I want to understand. I want to know more." There was a long silence on the other end. The man waited, his heart racing. Then his father spoke, his voice quieter now. "I'm glad you called," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." They spoke for hours, sharing stories from the past, reminiscing about the good times and acknowledging the struggles. The man learned things he hadn't known about his father, the sacrifices he had made, the challenges he had faced. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of closeness to him that had been missing for far too long. By the end of the conversation, the man felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his chest. He had taken the first step toward understanding his past, and it had felt like a breakthrough. He knew there was still much more to uncover, but now he was ready. The photo that had started all of this was no longer just a reminder of what was lost. It had become a symbol of the journey he was about to take to reconnect with everything that truly mattered. The man spent the next few weeks in a haze of reflection, trying to process the conversation with his father and the emotions it stirred. It had been a long time since they had talked so openly, and the weight of the things he had learned was still settling in. As much as he had hoped for answers, he realized there was still so much more to uncover. Things that weren't always said, things that had been left unsaid for far too long. His father's quiet admission that there were things he had kept hidden from him had sparked a deep curiosity. He had always assumed his parents' lives were as straightforward as the picture-perfect family they had portrayed. But now he understood that things weren't always as they seemed. The man felt a pull to revisit more of his past. After talking with his father, he knew that there were pieces of the story missing, things his parents had shielded him from in their efforts to protect him. It wasn't about blame or resentment. It was about understanding. He wanted to know the whole truth, to piece together the fragments of a life that seemed so familiar but also so distant. The photo album had been the first step, but now he wanted to go deeper. He decided to visit his childhood home, the house he had grown up in, but had long since moved away from. He hadn't been there in years, at least not since his mother's passing, and there was something about the idea of returning that made him nervous. It wasn't that he didn't want to go back, but the thought of confronting memories that were so deeply tied to both happiness and loss was intimidating. Still, he knew it was something he had to do. The drive there was long, and as he approached the familiar neighborhood, he could feel a knot form in his stomach. The houses seemed smaller now, their paint a little more faded, the lawns not as well kept as they had been when he was a child. But still, there was something comforting about the area, the same street, the same trees that had stood tall for decades. It was like stepping into a piece of his past, even if that past felt like it was slowly slipping away. He pulled into the driveway of his old home and sat there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The house was still standing, though it looked different now, like time had aged it much like it had aged him. He hadn't thought about the place in years, but suddenly, he was flooded with memories of running through the backyard, climbing trees, and feeling like the world was full of possibility. The door opened slowly and his father stepped outside. The man hadn't expected him to be there, but he was glad to see him. His father gave him a small, hesitant smile, as if he had been waiting for this visit without knowing when it would come. They didn't speak immediately. Instead, they just stood there, taking in the familiar sight of the house. "You want to come inside?" his father asked, his voice soft. The man nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was ready to relive those memories. But he followed his father inside, and as they walked through the door, it was as if the years fell away. The living room still smelled the same, like old wood and fresh air. The furniture was the same, though a little more worn now. The photos on the walls, some of them faded, others still vibrant with color, were reminders of a life he had once lived here. His father led him to the kitchen, where they sat down at the same table where they had eaten countless meals together. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm grounding them in the present while the past lingered in the background. For a while, neither of them said anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was just there, as if it was waiting for something to be said. Finally, his father broke the silence. "I know you've got questions," he said, his voice quiet. "Things I didn't tell you, things I should have told you." The man nodded, his chest tightening. He wasn't sure what to ask first, but he knew it was time to hear the stories that had been kept hidden. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" His father's face softened and he looked down at his hands as if he was trying to find the right words. "There are things I wanted to protect you from," he began slowly. "There were struggles, financial problems, health issues. I didn't want you to worry about that. I thought if you had a happy childhood, a carefree one, you'd be better off. But in doing that, I kept too much from you. I didn't realize how much it would affect you in the long run." The man listened intently, his heart heavy with emotion. He had never known about the financial difficulties his parents had faced. He had never realized how much his father had sacrificed, working long hours, barely making ends meet, all to make sure he had the things he needed. His father's struggle hidden behind the walls of their home was something he had never seen. "I remember," his father continued, "when things started to get really tight. I didn't want you to see that. I didn't want you to feel like you had to worry. So I did what I could to shield you from it. But it wasn't just money. It was everything. I wasn't always the father I should have been. I didn't always know how to be there for you in the way you needed." The man felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't anger or resentment, just a deep sadness for the way things had turned out. For so many years, he had blamed his parents for not giving him enough, for not being the kind of parents he thought they should be. But now he was seeing things from a new perspective. They had done the best they could, and in their own way they had tried to give him everything they could. "I didn't know," the man whispered. "I didn't know you were going through all that." His father reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "I know you didn't, I'm sorry for that. But I'm glad we're talking about it now. I want you to know the truth." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them processing the weight of the conversation. The man felt a sense of release, as if a door had been opened that had been shut for far too long. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would, but he understood more than he had before. And that was enough for now. Before he left, his father handed him a small box from the shelf, a box he hadn't noticed before. "There's something in here I think you should see," his father said, his voice quiet. The man opened the box carefully. Inside he found letters, old yellowed letters from his mother. There were also small mementos from their life together, tokens of love, reminders of a life filled with both joy and hardship. As he sifted through the letters, he saw his mother's handwriting, delicate and full of love, telling stories he had never heard before. In those letters, he learned more about his mother's struggles, her hopes and her dreams for their family. He saw the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had let go of to give him a better life. And in those moments, he realized that the story of his life wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had shaped it. When he left his father's house that afternoon, he felt different. The weight of the past had not disappeared, but it had shifted. It wasn't just a burden anymore, it was a story that was his to tell, a part of who he was. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. After leaving his father's house, the man felt like a weight had been lifted, but there was still so much left to process. He had learned things he never expected to hear, things that helped him understand his parents' choices, but also things that left him wondering about the course of his own life. He was grateful for the revelations, but they had also sparked a new wave of questions. In the following days, he found himself grappling with a mixture of emotions. On one hand, there was relief. Finally, he understood the struggles his parents had faced, the burdens they carried that he had never seen. But on the other hand, there was a sense of guilt, the kind of guilt that gnawed at him for not realizing sooner the sacrifices they had made for him. They had always tried to shield him from the harsh realities of life, but in doing so, they had unknowingly created a distance between them, and he had allowed it to grow. He found himself thinking about the years that had slipped away, years when he had been too busy with his own life, too focused on his own problems to pay attention to what was really important. His relationship with his parents had become strained over the years, and he couldn't help but wonder if it had been avoidable. He had taken so much for granted, but now he was determined to change that. The phone call with his father, the letters he had found, and the long conversation with his parents had given him a new sense of clarity. He wanted to rebuild the bridges that had burned, to reconnect with the people who had shaped him. He had to start making up for lost time, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths along the way. The next step was clear. He had to take action. He couldn't keep waiting for life to give him answers. It was time to reach out, to make things right. He began with his father, calling him again to set up a time to visit. But this time it wasn't just about questions, it was about reconciliation. He wanted to show his father that he wasn't the same person he had been before. He wasn't just looking for answers anymore. He was looking for a way forward. When they met again, it was different. The man wasn't the same person who had walked into his father's house a few weeks ago, filled with confusion and regret. Now he felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that had been missing for so long. His father noticed it too. "I can see you've changed," his father said quietly after a long pause. "I'm proud of you, son." Those words, simple as they were, hit him harder than anything else. For so long, he had felt disconnected from his family, uncertain of where he fit into the larger picture. But now, for the first time in years, he felt like he was where he was supposed to be, not just physically, but emotionally. Their conversation this time was easier, more open. They talked about the past, but also about the future. His father shared more stories he had never told before about his own childhood, his own struggles, and the dreams he had for his family. The man listened intently, trying to absorb everything. It was like putting together the final pieces of a puzzle, the pieces that had been scattered and forgotten for so long. But it wasn't just his father he had to reconnect with. He realized that the wounds with his mother, although healed in their own way, still needed to be addressed. She had been the heart of their family, the one who had kept everything together even when it felt like things were falling apart. Losing her had left a hole in his heart that he had never fully acknowledged. In the weeks that followed, he made a point to visit his mother's grave. It had been years since he had come here, and standing in front of the grave, he felt a rush of emotions. Love, regret, sorrow. He spoke to her, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words heavy with meaning. "I didn't realize how much you carried for us. I didn't see it when I should have. I wish I could have been there for you like you were there for me." He stood there for a while, just allowing himself to feel everything he had been holding in for so long. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about honoring it, accepting it, and learning from it. His mother had done everything she could to raise him, to love him, and to give him the best life she could. Now it was his turn to carry that love forward. Over the next few months, he worked to rebuild the relationships that had been neglected for too long. He called his father regularly, and they began to spend more time together, talking not just about the past, but about everything. His father's health, his own hopes and dreams, the things they had never shared before. He also reconnected with old friends, people he hadn't spoken to in years. He realized that, like with his family, he had let these friendships slip away. Some of them had changed, and some of them had remained the same. But either way, they were important to him. Rebuilding these connections wasn't always easy, but it felt like the right thing to do. He didn't want to live in isolation anymore. He didn't want to keep hiding from the people who cared about him. He had to face the messiness of life, even if it was uncomfortable. The more he reached out, the more he realized just how much he had been missing. There was something deeply satisfying about reconnecting with people, about taking the time to nurture the relationships that truly mattered. It wasn't always perfect, and it didn't happen overnight, but slowly, he began to rebuild a sense of community in his life. But the most significant change was in himself. He wasn't the same person who had stumbled across that old photo album in the attic. The journey of reconnecting with his past, of facing the things he had avoided for so long, had transformed him. He was no longer weighed down by regret. He had found a new purpose, one that was grounded in understanding and growth. He no longer saw life as a series of isolated events. Instead, he understood that everything was interconnected, and that the relationships he had once neglected were the threads that held everything together. In the end, he realized that the photo had done more than just remind him of a happier time. It had given him the courage to confront the past and make changes in the present. It had forced him to look at the person he had become and ask himself if that was really who he wanted to be. And in doing so, he had rediscovered the value of love, family, and connection. The photograph had been the catalyst, but the real change had come from within. As he sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset, he felt a deep sense of peace. The past was never going to be perfect, but it had shaped him in ways he could now appreciate. He had finally made peace with it, and more importantly, he had made peace with himself. Months passed, and the man found himself in a new chapter of his life, one that he had never imagined for himself. He had spent years avoiding the past, running from the discomfort of memories he didn't want to face. But now he had faced them. He had confronted the truths that had been hidden for so long, and in doing so, he had begun to rebuild something that had once seemed lost: connection. The relationships he had worked so hard to rebuild were starting to flourish in ways he hadn't expected. His bond with his father was stronger than it had been in years. They spent weekends together, not just talking about the past but also making new memories. They laughed about old family stories, shared meals, and even worked together on projects around the house. His father was still the same quiet, strong man he had always been, but now there was a new openness between them, a new understanding. His father often reminded him, with a gentle smile, how proud he was of the man he had become, and those words, simple yet profound, meant more to him than he could ever express. He had spent years wondering if he had lived up to his parents' expectations. But now he realized it wasn't about meeting some standard. It was about showing up, being present, and doing the work to make things right. His relationships with old friends had also blossomed. At first, reconnecting with them had felt awkward, as though time had created an unspoken barrier. But as they spent more time together, that barrier faded. They shared stories of their lives, some of them difficult, some of them joyful. And with each conversation, the man felt like he was stepping back into the person he had been before life had gotten so complicated. He remembered the laughter, the carefree moments, and the deep bonds that had once defined those friendships. There was a particular friend, one he had been especially close to in his younger years, who had always been there for him, until life had pulled them in different directions. They had both changed, but the connection between them was still strong. One afternoon, they sat on the porch of his childhood home, sipping coffee and catching up. "Do you ever feel like time just slips away?" his friend asked, a thoughtful look on his face. The man nodded, feeling the weight of the question. "Yeah, it feels like one minute everything is normal and the next it's all different. But I've realized something. I can't keep living in the past. I need to embrace the present, what's here, what's now." His friend smiled, understanding. "It's good to see you like this. You've always been a little hard on yourself." "I think I needed to go through everything I've been through to get to this point," the man replied. "I've spent too much time focusing on what I lost instead of what I still have." In that moment, he understood something crucial. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward with a deeper appreciation for the things that truly mattered. The relationships he had with his family and friends were the heart of his life, and he had been given another chance to nurture them. But the most profound change wasn't just in his relationships with others, it was in how he saw himself. He no longer viewed himself as someone trapped by past mistakes or missed opportunities. He understood now that growth was a process. It was about facing your fears, acknowledging your regrets, and choosing to do better. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. The man had also reconnected with parts of himself he had long neglected. He had always loved photography as a child, but somewhere along the way he had put the camera down. Now he found himself picking it up again, capturing moments of beauty in the everyday. He wasn't just photographing the world around him. He was photographing his own journey of rediscovery. Each picture told a story, of healing, of growth, and of the small joys that he had once overlooked. He also took up writing again, something he hadn't done in years. It started with simple journaling, notes about his day, his thoughts, and his emotions. But it soon grew into something more meaningful. He began to write about his past, his family, and the lessons he had learned. It was a way of making sense of everything that had happened, a way of putting it into words and finding closure. He didn't share these writings with anyone. They were, for him, a form of personal therapy. One evening, as he sat in his favorite chair, writing by the light of a lamp, he realized that he was no longer afraid of his own story. He had spent so long running from it, trying to forget parts of himself he didn't want to face, but now he embraced it, all of it. The good, the bad, and the messy. It was his story, and he had the power to write the next chapter. As he looked back at the path he had walked, the mistakes, the regrets, the moments of clarity, he understood that they had all led him to this place. The photo he had found in the attic was just the beginning. It had opened his eyes to the things he had been blind to. But the real change came when he chose to act, when he chose to face his past and work to heal the relationships that mattered most. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when he wondered if the damage was too great, if some things were beyond repair. But as he learned, healing wasn't a straight line, it was a journey. And it was one that required patience, both with himself and with others. His life had transformed in ways he had never expected. He had found a new sense of purpose, not just in his relationships, but in his own self-awareness. He understood that true happiness wasn't found in possessions or achievements. It was found in the connections you make, the love you give, and the person you choose to become. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch, watching the sunset with his father, he felt a deep sense of peace. The past was no longer a weight he carried. It was a part of his story, and he had learned from it. His future, though uncertain, was filled with possibility. He didn't know what would come next, but he felt ready to face it. Whatever it was, he had found something he hadn't realized he was searching for all along, a sense of belonging, not just with his family, but with himself. He was no longer just the man who had been lost in the past. He was the man who had found his way back to the people who mattered, and to the person he had once been. And with that, he knew he was ready to embrace whatever the next chapter would bring. As time passed, the man's life continued to evolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. The journey of reconnecting with his past, of piecing together the fragments of his family's history, had not been easy, but it had been worthwhile. With every step forward, he felt a deeper sense of clarity and peace. The weight that had once consumed him, the weight of regret and missed opportunities, began to lift. But as with any journey, there were still challenges to face. He had rebuilt connections with his family and friends, and he had found a new sense of self-acceptance. Yet deep inside, he knew that there was still one piece of the puzzle left to put together, one thing he needed to face. His mother's passing had left a hole in his heart that he had never fully addressed. The grief had been overwhelming, and for years he had buried it, not knowing how to cope. But now, with everything he had learned about himself and his family, he realized that the healing process wasn't complete. He had to finally allow himself to grieve in a way that was honest, raw, and real. One day, while sitting in his favorite chair by the window, he found himself thinking about his mother. It had been months since he had visited her grave, but today, something felt different. He couldn't explain it, but he felt the need to go back, to visit her and say the things he had never said. It wasn't just about paying his respects. It was about confronting the pain he had been avoiding for so long. Without much thought, he grabbed his coat and keys and drove to the cemetery. The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the graves and trees. As he walked through the rows of headstones, he felt a deep sense of quiet, as if the world had paused for a moment, allowing him the space to breathe and reflect. When he reached his mother's grave, he stood there for a long time, just looking at the simple stone marker. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had last been here. when grief had been so fresh, so raw that it had been impossible to put into words. But now he could breathe. The pain was still there, but it didn't consume him like it once had. He knelt down and placed a small bouquet of flowers on her grave, something he had meant to do for a long time. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze against his skin, and then for the first time since her death he spoke to her. "Mom," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I've been looking back on everything, trying to understand it all. And I realize now how much I took for granted, how much you did for me, how much you sacrificed. I wish I had told you that more. I wish I had told you how much I appreciated everything you did." He paused, his chest tightening. The words he had kept locked away for so long were finally coming to the surface. It felt both freeing and painful at the same time. "I was angry with you," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Angry for not being there when I needed you the most. Angry because I didn't understand your struggles. But now I know I see it. I see everything you did for us, for me, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." He wiped away a tear that had escaped down his cheek, then took a deep breath. "I've learned so much since you've been gone. About myself. About life. And I want you to know that I'm okay. I've found a way to heal, to move forward. And it's because of everything you gave me. The love, the support. It's all still with me in here." He placed his hand on his chest, feeling the weight of the words. He sat there for a while longer, just allowing himself to feel whatever came up. It wasn't about having all the answers or finding closure. It was about honoring the love they had shared and acknowledging the pain of losing her. He knew that grief wasn't something you ever fully get over, but something you learn to live with. And today, he was finally at peace with that. As he left the cemetery, he felt lighter, as though he had left part of his sorrow behind. It wasn't that the grief was gone, it never would be, but it no longer felt like a heavy burden. He had acknowledged it, allowed himself to feel it, and now he was ready to move forward. The days that followed were filled with small moments of clarity and joy. The man's relationship with his father continued to grow stronger. They spent weekends together, enjoying simple activities like cooking meals or taking long walks. The bond they shared was no longer tainted by unspoken words or past mistakes. It had been rebuilt on a foundation of understanding, love, and acceptance. One afternoon, while they were sitting together in the garden, his father turned to him and said something that the man had needed to hear for a long time. "I'm proud of you," his father said, his voice soft but full of meaning. "You've come a long way. You've faced a lot and you've become a better man because of it." Those words, spoken so simply, meant more to the man than any praise or accomplishment ever could. They were the words he had longed to hear when he was younger, the words that now at last brought him peace. But the journey didn't end there. There were still moments of uncertainty, still times when he found himself questioning his choices or doubting his progress. The world wasn't perfect and life wasn't always fair. But now, he understood that it wasn't about being perfect. It was about growth, about learning, and about staying true to what really mattered. As he spent more time with his friends, his family, and even on his own, he realized that the true meaning of life wasn't found in achievements or accolades. It was found in the connections we make with others, in the love we give and receive, and in the moments that bring us joy, no matter how small. And so the man continued on his journey, no longer running from his past but embracing it. He had come to understand that the past, while filled with pain and loss, had shaped him into who he was today. And the future, though uncertain, was full of possibilities. As he sat one evening watching the sunset from his porch, he felt a deep sense of peace. The photo he had found so long ago had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. It had forced him to face the past, to heal the wounds, and to rebuild the relationships that mattered most. And now, as he looked out at the world around him, he felt ready for whatever came next, because he knew deep down that life wasn't about perfection. It was about the journey. And for the first time in a long time, he was okay with the imperfections. He was okay with the messiness of it all. He had found peace not in the absence of pain, but in the ability to face it head on and keep moving forward. The man's life had settled into a rhythm that, while not perfect, felt more balanced than it had in years. He had done the hard work of reconnecting with his family, healing old wounds and learning to embrace the present. But life, as it often does, continued to throw new challenges his way. Each day brought something different, Moments of joy, moments of doubt, and everything in between. One of the biggest changes he experienced was in how he viewed his own purpose. For so long, he had been caught up in the idea of success, measuring his life by what he achieved, how much he had, and what he could offer to the world. But now, after everything he had been through, he understood that true fulfillment came from something much deeper. It wasn't about having the most possessions or reaching some elusive milestone. It was about living authentically, embracing his imperfections, and finding peace with who he was. His connection with his father remained strong, and the two of them spent many more weekends together, talking about their lives and sharing their thoughts on the world around them. Their conversations had evolved over time, becoming more meaningful and less about surface-level topics. They talked about their past, their regrets, their triumphs, and their dreams for the future. One Saturday afternoon, while they were working in the garden, his father turned to him and said, "You know, I've been thinking, we've been through a lot as a family, haven't we?" The man smiled, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, we have, but we've made it through, and I think we're stronger for it." His father nodded thoughtfully. "I think so too. And it's not just about surviving, is it? It's about living, really living. I wish I had realized that sooner." The man felt a deep sense of gratitude for his father's words. They were simple, but they carried so much weight. In that moment, he realized that they had both come to understand something important, that life was about more than just getting by. It was about experiencing everything it had to offer, both the highs and the lows, and finding joy in the journey, no matter where it took them. Their relationship had transformed, and it wasn't just because they had spent more time together. It was because they had started to be more honest with each other, to speak from the heart rather than just going through the motions. The man had once felt distant from his father, unsure of how to connect, but now they were as close as they had ever been. They had become partners in a way, supporting each other through the ups and downs of life. But as the weeks went by, the man began to realize something. Despite all the progress he had made in his relationships and his understanding of himself, there was still one thing that he had been avoiding. It was the one area of his life that still felt incomplete. He had made peace with his past, reconnected with his family, and found a sense of purpose. But there was still something missing. That something was love. The man had always been cautious when it came to matters of the heart. His past relationships had been filled with disappointment and heartbreak. He had been in love before, but the fear of getting hurt had caused him to pull away before things could get too serious. He had convinced himself that he didn't need love, that he could be happy on his own. But deep down he knew that was a lie. He had been avoiding love because he was afraid of the vulnerability it required. He was afraid of opening his heart again. One evening, while sitting on his porch, he found himself thinking about this. He had always been a person who valued independence, who prided himself on being self-sufficient. But as he reflected on his life, he realized that true happiness wasn't found in being alone. It was found in sharing your life with others, whether it was family, friends, or a romantic partner. He had spent so much of his life holding himself back from love, convincing himself that it wasn't necessary. But now he was ready to face that fear. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Love, after all, was unpredictable. It required trust, vulnerability, and a willingness to give of yourself. But he also knew that love was worth the risk. It was the one thing he had been missing, the one thing that could complete the picture of his life. The next few weeks were filled with self-reflection. He spent time thinking about what he truly wanted in a partner, about the qualities that mattered most to him. He wasn't looking for perfection. He had learned that much, but he was looking for someone who could meet him halfway, someone who could understand him and accept him for who he was, flaws and all. And then, one day, he met her. It wasn't anything dramatic or life-changing at first. They met through a mutual friend, and their conversation was simple, nothing extraordinary. But there was something about her that drew him in. She had a warmth about her, a kindness that he immediately connected with. They started talking more, getting to know each other in a way that felt easy and natural. Over time, their connection deepened. They shared their dreams, their fears, their pasts, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it felt real. It felt right. For the first time in a long time, the man found himself opening up to someone, letting down the walls he had built so high. As their relationship grew, the man found himself learning new things about love. things that he had never understood before. He realized that love wasn't about finding someone to complete you. It was about two people coming together, each whole in their own way and supporting each other as they walked through life together. He learned that love wasn't always easy. There were misunderstandings, moments of doubt, and challenges to overcome. But what mattered was the commitment to work through those difficulties, to communicate openly, and to always choose each other day after day. He had spent so much of his life avoiding love out of fear, but now he understood that love was worth the risk, worth the vulnerability. It wasn't just about being in a relationship. It was about growing together, learning together, and building something that was stronger than either person alone. The man had spent so much of his life thinking that he didn't need anyone, that he could be happy on his own. But now, with her by his side, he realized that he didn't have to face life alone. He had someone to share it with, someone who saw him for who he truly was and accepted him completely. As he sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset with her, he felt a deep sense of contentment. He had come so far on his journey. He had faced his fears, healed his relationships, and found love in a way he never thought possible. And in that moment, as he looked at her, he realized that the greatest gift life had to offer was love. Not just the love of a partner, but the love of family, of friends, and of self. It was the thread that connected everything, the force that made life meaningful. And for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to be at peace.